Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. We're finally following up on our not-vore game, and if you're confused, don't worry, just be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed today's video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Also remember to turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. So yes, recently we worked on a game that totally wasn't meant to be a vore game, but weirdly enough ended up being one of the more violent things seen on the channel in a while. That aside though, it was meant to be the base for another idea, which actually brings us to today's project. So if you haven't seen the previous video, a link can be found in the description to get caught up. Now aside from a different look, our hero plays very differently from our previous game. For starters, they no longer consume enemies, instead they are able to possess them. This is done using a dummy object which is activated and deactivated when needed. When the player possesses an enemy, the dummy is activated and given the target enemy stats, such as health and weapon type. The target is then disabled, allowing the player to now control the dummy version. While using this dummy, the player is able to fire their weapon, which again, thanks to our previous endeavors, uses a universal attack system. And should any enemies be within viewing range of the player attacking someone, they will retaliate. When this happens, the ID for the enemy that the player is currently possessing is added to a quote-unquote hit list. Remember this for later. Now, when the dummy is no longer needed, either due to loss of health or the player manually leaving the body, it is reset and disabled. This also reactivates the original enemy, and if they should technically be dead, they are removed from both the game and the hit list mentioned earlier. But if the enemy is still technically alive, they are reactivated and moved to the dummy's position. And finally, if they are on that hit list, this makes them an enemy to the enemy, thus allowing the player the ability to turn enemy units against one another. Now this is cool and all, but there is one enemy type that cannot be possessed. And for the sake of simplicity, they're simply referred to as docs. And the doc unit is actually the only unit that can hurt the player. Their unique attack is also able to kick the player out of their possessed state, returning them to their original ghost form. So in summary, the player's goal is to take out all the docs, and the doc's job is to take out the player, which is often a race against time, because enemies, while unable to actually hurt the player, will alert the docs to their position. The various enemy units are the only way the player can deal damage to anything, but it comes at the cost of being vulnerable, and enemies can be turned against one another to help distract the mob, which is important because the mob also acts as the doc's eyes. And speaking of eyes, did you know your eyes can bear witness to exclusive content, downloads, and early access to the Dev Diary videos before they're released on YouTube? Supporting me on Patreon can get you all those perks and also help me keep making these videos. Anyway, if you were curious, the status effects added in the previous video as well as the laser gun were removed. The laser was a little overpowered and the status effects just didn't feel like they worked with the concept. Speaking of which, despite all the minor tweaks made here and there to get this working, this is where I called it on the project, and for a number of reasons. For starters, I realized that this would work better as a stealth game than an arcade action game, but in order to make it such would require a ton of extra code that also need entire reworks to the current system. Now we're talking level generation, pathfinding, vision, maybe even hearing mechanics, and that's just off the top of my head. In other words, it was going to be a lot. And while this was a fun little experiment, I wasn't that committed to the project, you know? It was just a silly idea that may have some merit, but a robust stealth game currently isn't what I like to spend my time working on. So I mean, what do you think? Is the idea worth all the extra effort to turn it into a stealth game? Have you played any games that have done something similar? Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments. And with that brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.